Planetside 2 at its core is a fast person shooter. It's always important to make sure you have good loadouts so that you can do as well as possible. First loadout I want to go over here is on Infiltrator with an SMG. You generally want to be trying to shoot people from the side or from behind, and so positioning is important. In order to get to that position, using a Valkyrie or a Scythe Mosquito Reaver with ejection seat in order to get to that position will help you out. You can pull unlimited aircraft from Courtian bases. It's genuinely very useful if you're going to be using this loadout. This loadout's also very good in Zarg fights specifically, not so good if you're facing someone one-on-one. Of course, Stalker Infiltrator does have its place. It's something I used to really enjoy doing. Stalker Infiltrator's main purpose is to hack enemy vehicle terminals and basically kill people that then are trying to pull vehicles. Next loadout here we have is the CQC Bolt Infiltrator. You've got a high refresh rate monitor, a high frame rate in game, and on top of that have good aim to flick to targets. This can be good to use. Only in close combat or medium range. You don't want to be using snipers at long range. That's suboptimal because the kills per minute that you're going to get is so low, you may as well not be playing the game at that point. Next loadout here is the knife loadout. This has been entirely nerfed to the point by Rail where really it's not worth using. Knives are now very underpowered relative to their strength that they previously had. Knives were in a good place and they're no longer really that good. I don't think Rel really understood the knife meta. It's a shame, but I think it's worth mentioning. Next class we're quickly going to go over here is Light Assault. There's a few different ways of playing this class. The first one is the traditional C4 Fairy, which is dropping C4 onto usually Sunderers to kill the logistics for that base capture. Now, truth be told, Engineer with tank mines and an ejection CESF or a Valkyrie, to be honest, works better than C4 Fairy, but if you want to do this instead, this can work too. The other kind of traditional way to play Light Assault, which definitely has a lot more viability, is on roofs and areas where you can get a vertical height advantage. This is generally only going to be useful if there's not much air to ground around. So this class is very, very situational. Most of the time you would be better off just playing Heavy Assault. There are a few limited times where this can make sense to use. Now there is also kind of the Breach class, or like the movement based class, which kind of is about avoiding the opponent and making them have to turn around to kill you. This does have some use cases which genuinely you can kill heavy assaults with. Basically you either fly really fast forward or really fast up, and then you kill them with a shotgun or you kill them with a really good hipfire weapon, and that does work to a degree and it is worth mentioning. Next here we have the Engineer. This is kind of the point holding loadout that you would use if you're point holding. This is generally the only use case for Engineer because truth be told, people oftentimes won't really run out of ammo if we're just being honest with ourselves during a point hold. Even then you only need one Engineer. But this specific loadout is one of the good use cases for Engineer, and that is the baby gates, otherwise known as hard light barriers, and they are actually pretty good for keeping the opposition out, placing them at door frames. I'm not going to post an Engineer class for just running around playing infantry in Zarg fights because you may as well just be playing heavy assault at that point. There's only really this use case and a few others that I'm going to go into where Engineer makes sense. One of those cases is if you're using a mana turret in a point hold with, you know, robots, technician and jockey. That's a genuine, really good use case for using Engineer. Of course, the most used and probably most useful loadout for Engineer is going to be driving around in vehicles. The Punisher can work pretty good with this in order to get for the underbarrel repair that you can get, and then on top of that just throwing a repair grenade and then using your heat tool. And then if you're at Sunderer, you can resupply and keep doing that verbatim with a bit of heat tool usage in between. I would argue that running flak's pretty much always the best option, but you can use Bandolier if you want to have multiple repair grenades because they are also very useful. But you are going to run into issues if you're not running flak, just to be honest. The next loadout I quickly want to go over is probably my most favourite at the moment, especially since shotguns have been significantly nerfed, and that is Medic. Medic right now is in a really good place just because shotguns are no longer an issue. Keep in mind the weapon that I'm recommending here, the HV45, is because you have more aim down sight strafe speed, which is actually really useful, especially if you're decent at abusing movement mechanics. HV45 for that reason is specifically good. There are other options, especially if you have ASP 100. That'll give you access to carbines for Medic, which sometimes can be good. You're not going to see that aim down sight strafe movement speed buff that you are going to see with HV45 and the other ones on this list. I think the NS11A doesn't actually have this though. Okay, so next is the more traditional point hold loadout. The only difference here really is you're going to be using Safeguard. Safeguard's extremely good for an point hold. Some people like using medkits anyway, some people like using C4. C4 is optimal, but it's not necessarily as strong as it was because everyone's running flak these days. So, you know, killing infantry with C4 really isn't as much of an option as it used to be. You still do need some way to deal with maxes, so C4 definitely do have their place, they're just not as strong as they used to be. Next loadout I quickly want to mention here is the Bubble Shield Medic. This one is sometimes okay, but here's the bit of nuance that I want to mention. These bubbles shield things, the deployables that basically give you a passive regen on your shield, will only give you like 150 shield before you start to naturally regen your shields back to foe anyway. So you only really get that benefit from Bubble Shield, and the deployable, in order to get this shield, does get destroyed pretty easily by grenades, C4 coming in, so it's not necessarily the strongest of things, but it is something to keep in mind. It does have some limited use, but it's really probably pretty underpowered right now relative to where it really should be, especially compared to the AoE heal that offers you a lot of utility and your allies. It's just the difference is quite stark. Alright, and last but not least is Heavy Assault. If you want to play very selfishly, you know, I think that this is a very good class loadout to go for. Heavy Assault selfishly is very, very strong. In terms of overall utility in the battlefield, Medic arguably does have a decent advantage, because even just using revive grenades, even if you don't pull out your tool that much, is still very good. But there are situations definitely where Heavy Assault, you will feel the difference if you're not using it relative to Medic. You know, there are definitely situations where Heavy Assault really does have its benefit. There's a few different reasons for this. First off, having more ammo capacity is really useful, but also just flat out having 450 extra health, especially if you combine it with Assimilate and Adrenaline Shield. You know, it is good for like keeping your uptime high, right? Engaging multiple opponents one after another without having to have much downtime. There is also, of course, the point holding variant of this, which is going to be a lot more to do with killing maxes, especially with the Decimator, or you can use like Bandolier with flash grenades, which does have some utility as well. Scavenger can make sense if you don't have the Beetlejuice, or if you don't have another high ammo capacity weapon. And even in those situations, arguably Scavenger still is very strong, because those weapons usually have a long reload time anyway. Okay, and last but not least here, we have the Max. This as an anti-infantry role can make sense. You can also run Gorgons or the faction specific alternative for like basically use the anti-vehicle weapon on the Max, but instead you're shooting other Maxes. If that weapon also has viability against infantry, it actually can be surprisingly decent, especially with salvage. Now of course there's the anti-air variant as well, but this has been nerfed, especially recently. Rel really messed up the Buster Max viability, so honestly I'd rather just see people using a medium anvil with Skyguard, or just getting inside instead of using a Buster Max right now. But you know, you can try it out and figure it out for yourself. It's not awful, but it's definitely not as strong as it was in the past. Now that's pretty much everything. Hope you all have a wonderful week. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because it does help so much, and like the video as well. I'm out. GG. Bye bye.